years after the 100th anniversary of suffrage. In order to stay vital and relevant, we will need to build on each other's strengths. 2017 may well go down in history as the start of the decade of women. It is now my pleasure to introduce California Senior Senator Dianne Feinstein. She has a huge record of legislative achievement. These cover a range of issues. I don't have the time to read everything because it'll take days, but I'm going to just mention a few, from fuel efficiency of cars to sex trafficking and abuse to common sense gun laws, and on and on. I am now going to invite the senator to engage the secretary in conversation.
Thank you, Nuchi. Thank you so much.
So much.
This is your water and this is hers.
Oh, all right. Thank you so very much. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging a friend and a colleague of both Hillary's and mine. She's the indefatigable Barbara Mikulski, and she's sitting in the front row. Yes, but let me make one more introduction. And someone who's been a Democrat, a minister, and supported all of us, the one and only Jesse Jackson. Okay. Now they want to give you
Before we proceed, can you still hear me? Yes. Before we proceed, we are going to together jointly offer the Woman of the Year award to the Secretary Clinton. So let's stand.
Should we put you in the middle? Okay,
Yes.
So, okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Hillary, are you ready?
I am ready, Dianne.
Here we go. I'm one who believes you were a great Secretary of State, and that you haven't received the credit you deserve. If I recall correctly, you've traveled nearly 1 million miles. You visited 112 countries. You led the effort to impose sanctions on Iran, which set the state for the Iranian nuclear deal. You personally negotiated a ceasefire in Gaza to stop Hamas rocket attacks. You worked to ensure the ratification of the New START Treaty, which reduced both American and Russia's nuclear arsenals to their lowest point in 50 years. And you focused on the rights of women and LGBT people, to include successfully advocating for the first UN Human Rights Council resolution on LGBT human rights. Now, I've got a tough question. What do you think was your most important achievement?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You know, let me, before I answer that, thank the club. Thank you, Nuchi. Thank you all, not only for hosting this event and for this great honor that you've given, but for really leading the reinvigoration of the National Democratic Women's Club. What you're doing now, the future that you're planning, is so needed. And as you know, I am a great fan and admirer of Eleanor Roosevelt, and she was here often because she understood the importance of women's political involvement and women's political voices. So I just want to salute everybody in the club for just getting behind the mission and working so hard to achieve it. And I'm very grateful to you because we need you now more than ever. So thank you all.
Don't let her off the hook here.
No, I'm not gonna get off the hook. Look, I think when I look back on those 4 years that I was privileged to be Secretary of State, we inherited a lot of problems in the world. And it was something that both President Obama and I were, very aware of. In fact, when he asked me to be Secretary of State, he said, look, we have a financial crisis at home, and we have all of these problems around the world. I'm going to concentrate on the economic crisis, and I want you to go and start rebuilding our relationships with nations around the world. And I think we, to a great extent, achieved that. Restored respect for America, restored our alliances, and understanding that we were stronger together if we were working in concert with each other. So I guess the two things that I would mention are the effort I undertook to get international sanctions on Iran. And I think that was a critically important step toward the negotiations that led to the Iran agreement. Because we had been sanctioning Iran all by ourselves in the United States for years. When I was in the Senate, Diane, Barbara, we were voting for every sanction we could think of against Iran. It wasn't enough, and that's why I spent 18 months working really hard to convince the rest of the world, including China and Russia, to pass tough sanctions at the Security Council. And then I began the negotiations that led to the Iran agreement that was implemented by my successor and a lot of other people working very hard. So on the specific accomplishments list, I think that was incredibly important, and it pains me greatly to see the cavalier attitude that this administration is showing toward that agreement, which did put a lid on Iran's nuclear program. Did it end all of Iran's bad behavior? No, it did not. But I would rather deal with their bad behavior while stopping their centrifuges than trying to deal with their bad behavior while the centrifuges are spinning in underground, undisclosed facilities, which is what was happening when we started. And then the second issue, of course, is my passion, the unfinished business of women's rights and opportunities. My dear friend Melanne Verveer is here. She became the first global women's ambassador to deal with a lot of these issues, everything from trafficking to women in conflict to deprivation of women's rights and opportunities, because I firmly believe that it's in America's interest. It's in the interest of democracy. It's in the interest of peace and justice for the United States to stand up and advocate for women's rights around the world. And I'm very proud of the work we did there. Again, I'm holding my breath because although President Obama, at the end of my time as Secretary of State, made permanent the position that we began, there doesn't seem to be much interest or understanding of the importance of working on behalf of women's rights and opportunities. And that's a big missed opportunity for the United States because we need to keep standing up for our values, speaking out, working toward greater opportunities for women, which does help support democracy and does actually deal with and diminish conflict. So I would say those are two things.
Good. Thank you. It's hard to call her the secretary, but as Hillary said, one of the most important things, too, was a reset with Russia. And you write in your book about Vladimir Putin's animus toward you. Let me quote. You wrote, quote, Putin doesn't respect women, and that he blamed you for demonstrations against him. He said that you, quote, gave them a signal, end quote. So my question is, what conclusions have you come to about Russia and Putin and the possibility of a reset by the time you left the State Department? And how do you view Russia and Putin today over this past year?
Well, better start making breakfast. Okay, so here's the short version. We did engage in a reset with Russia, and we did it for some very specific strategic goals. The START Treaty, something that Diane mentioned, to reduce the nuclear arsenals on both sides. To work with Russia to get them to join the sanctions against Iran. To work with them to help us refuel and re-equip our troops in Afghanistan. I mean, we went into this with our eyes wide open, but we thought it was important to try to see if there were a way to work with Russia. And remember, when I was Secretary of State, Dmitry Medvedev was the president. He was sort of a phony president, but it was the president. And Putin was the prime minister. So we worked with a different leader on most of these things than Putin. Now, Putin decided in 2011 that he wanted to be president again. So he announced he was going to be president again, which, is quite appealing to people who prefer the authoritarian model, because all you do is just say, well, I think I'll be president again. Everybody goes, yay, yay. So he was clearly coming back. And in the fall of 2011, Russia held elections. And the elections were for representatives to the Duma and other positions. And they were incredibly flawed. They were, riddled with abuses. And I was the Secretary of State, and part of my job was to stand up for democracy, something we used to expect from our Secretary of State. And so I said, the Russian people deserve free and fair elections. They deserve elections where their voice and their vote count. Basically, that's what I said. And at the same time I was saying this, tens of thousands of Russians who felt exactly that, not because I said it, but because they had hoped for better, were flooding into the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg and other places to protest. And they were clearly protesting Putin. And Putin was really paranoid because of the Arab Spring and because of some of the other incidents that had occurred around the world. So he attacked me, said I was giving them a signal to go out into the streets, which was, not the case at all. And then there was Syria and Ukraine and other problems that we saw Putin causing. So I think Putin is very much attempting to reconstitute the power of Russia along its borders in Europe and Central Asia. And the idea that we would not stand up to him only encourages him. And in my book, What Happened, I have a whole chapter on Russia, because we are only at the beginning of understanding what the Russians did to affect our elections. And it's the first time we've had an adversary attack us that we have not responded. And as Diane knows, the Congress passed overwhelmingly new sanctions on Russia and Putin's cronies, a lot of the oligarchs and others who do his bidding. And the Congress passed it, sort of forcing the president to sign it, but he hasn't implemented it. So what's the lesson from that? And the lesson is you can get away with attacking America, sowing discord and divisiveness, affecting our election, and this president and administration are not going to hold you accountable. That's very, very dangerous.
Thank you. I think that was really a very important analysis, so thank you really for everybody. Let me go to October of last year. You probably can guess what this is, but on 11 days before the election, the director of the FBI wrote a letter implying that the investigation into your emails was being reopened. You wrote in your book, why make a public statement like this, which was bound to be politically devastating, when the FBI itself couldn't say whether the new material was important in any way? The FBI didn't know the facts and didn't let that stop it from throwing the presidential election into chaos. Personally, I don't think there's any question that that affected the election. But now that a year has passed and you look back at this, how do you view what was done, the unusual nature of it, and the impact that it had on you and all of us that so wanted to see you President of the United States?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why I wrote this book, because after the election, I was stunned. I was devastated. I couldn't figure out what had happened. I knew some of what had happened, but not the whole picture. And I decided, for my own interests and understanding, I needed to dive into this, but also for my supporters, my friends, people who had really worked so hard for me, voted for me. And I think there were several factors. But if I were to rank them, I would say that in terms of affecting the momentum in the race, the Comey letter was the proximate cause. And let me just sort of paint the picture for you, because October 28th, when that letter dropped, it was just, to me, totally unmerited. And some of you might remember that on the Sunday before the election, Comey put out a 2-sentence email saying, "Just kidding, nothing there." There were so many, if they thought something was there, and I've never personally been convinced that they did, I think he was under pressure from certain elements of active and retired FBI agents. I think Rudy Giuliani played a role, because Rudy Giuliani, 2 days before October 28th, said a big surprise is coming on October 28th. So this to me was a very clear plan. How witting Comey himself was or not, I don't know. But the impact was the same. So, for example, let's take one state, Pennsylvania. If you're a Democrat running for president, you know you have to get a really big vote out of Philadelphia. You've got to get a good vote out of the Philadelphia suburbs. You've got to try to win Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. And you've got to try to win Northeast, Scranton, and Wilkes-Barre. So before October 28th, I was ahead in the Philadelphia suburbs by 26 points. After the Comey letter, my numbers began to drop. And what happened is that mostly women, Republican women, women who had decided, well, they were going to vote for me because of the debates. They were not scared off by all of the talk about lock her up and all of that stuff. So I ended up getting a very big vote out of Philadelphia. I won Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. I squeaked a win out in Northeast. But in the suburbs of Philadelphia, my lead before Comey was cut to 13 points. And I needed just a few more points in order to withstand what we knew would be a big Republican turnout in the rest of the state. So I knew that was the principal factor, but I want to add something, because I don't know if any of you saw Diane yesterday at the Intelligence Committee, but she was amazing. And we have got to get to the bottom of what happened, because let me draw your attention to a different day in October, October 7th, a very eventful day in the campaign. In the morning, the Director of National Intelligence, Jim Clapper, the Secretary of Homeland Security, came out and publicly said the Russians were behind the hacking of the DNC emails. They are interfering in our election. That's a huge story, okay? A few hours later, the Hollywood Access tape comes out. Forget about Jim Clapper and Jay Johnson. All of a sudden, we've got, the candidate, in his own words, basically confessing to be a sexual assaulter. Within 1 hour of that tape, WikiLeaks started dropping John Podesta's emails within 1 hour. Now, for about 48, 72 hours, the Hollywood Access tape was the story. Nothing about the Russians, just that. And then, though, what our research showed as I was writing the book is that the weaponization of WikiLeaks, turning it into fake news stories, taking comments out of emails like, I'm going out for pizza, and claiming that was code for a child trafficking ring in a pizza parlor here in Washington, which people believed. You know, you can laugh because it's so absurd. They believed it. So what we did was to track Google and the stories that people were looking for. And they were out of this whole trove of stolen emails that were weaponized to persuade people not to vote for me, not to vote at all, or to vote for third party. So this is a much more complicated story. I believe without the Comey letter, I would have won. But I think the other stuff in the atmosphere was also affecting people. And then voter suppression. We now know 200 to 300,000 people were turned away from the polls in Wisconsin alone. So there's a lot going on here. And part of the reason I wrote the book, and for all of you who are interested in these issues, I hope you'll read it, because it's not just about what happened. It's about what will keep happening if we don't figure out how to stop it.
How did you feel when the president claimed he fired Comey because of how he handled the email investigation?
Well, you know, this is one of the, craziest things about the last year. I have a whole chapter in the book called Those Damn Emails. And all the people who thought it was the most important issue since, I don't know what, Pearl Harbor. I mean, it felt like on some days, 600 days of coverage of this. Not one person has said there's anything inaccurate in everything I wrote in that chapter. And one of the things that I wrote in that chapter was keep these two thoughts in your head at once. Comey did mishandle the email issue. He broke protocol. He took unprecedented steps, both in July and in October. And I put in my chapter the very scathing review of his performance by the current Deputy Attorney General who Trump appointed. So there's no doubt that what he did was way out of bounds. However, that's not why he was fired. He was fired because of the Russia investigation. And Trump himself admitted that in an interview with Lester Holt. So the criticism of him that I have in the book, not out of my words, but the words of others, is absolutely accurate. But trying to prevent the Russia investigation by firing Comey raises a lot of very important questions that I hope we will finally get answers to.
Okay. Now, wasn't that something? Yeah. Okay. Now we're going to talk a little bit about women in politics. And it's very interesting. Women are held to different standards. And let me kind of give you one. I watched Hillary very carefully on 9/11. It was a very hot day. She was standing most of the time. I kept saying, I was thinking about, why don't you leave? Why don't you leave? She finally left. She stumbled getting into the car and found out she had a touch of pneumonia. And for days, the discussion was the weakness of women. However, I also remember watching, sitting in my office, a hearing room over in the House of Representatives, where for 11 hours, this woman sat and answered questions having to do with Benghazi. And I don't recall a single article talking about the stamina of what it was like. I think we one bathroom break for 11 hours to answer questions. So, here's the question. How do we overcome this? How do we have a similar analysis between men and women? I mean, nobody can fault you on the basis of your background, your expertise, your experience. I knew you when you first came to the Senate. You know, I know what you've done in the Senate. Barbara does. And yet you face this when you go out for higher office. Question, Madam, why?
Well, Diane, this is one of the issues that I hope my book helps to start a conversation about. Because sexism and misogyny are endemic in our society. It is not just politics, it is in business and media and every other aspect of our economy and our society. But let me talk about it in politics, because that's what I experienced in both 2016 and 2008. And I think that the double standard that applies to women in politics is alive and well. And although we've had tremendous success with so many extraordinary women, like the one who's sitting here with me, getting elected and reelected and running for reelection, which I'm very excited about. It still is the case that we face a lot of obstacles. So let me just mention a couple. Because I actually think the only way to get sexism out of politics is to get more women into politics. And so that it's not so unusual. You know, I was the only woman on the stage on the Democratic side in 2008. I was the only woman on the stage in the Democratic side in 2016. And there is a set of judgments about women that are just imposed. It's almost like a reflex. And I have lived through it. I understand that it's very much part of our social fabric. But part of the reason is that there aren't enough of us out there. And that's why I'm thrilled that thousands and thousands of women are saying they're going to run for office this year and next, right? So in the book, I talk about the judgments that are made about women, and they're rooted in how we actually feel about successful, ambitious women. Because ambitious is a compliment for men, and it's not for women. So the research is pretty clear that the more successful a man becomes, the more likable he is. And the reverse is true for women. The more successful we become, quote, the less likable we are viewed. And when a woman is advocating on behalf of someone else, I mean, people really liked me when I was advocating as First Lady or as Senator for my constituents or as Secretary of State serving President Obama. I left the State Department with a 69% approval rating. So I know that when you're advocating for someone else, you really are viewed as fulfilling a role that people understand. When you step up and say, hey, I would like to lead, it just totally switches on you. Now, a lot of people say, well, I'd vote for a woman, just not that woman, right? And of course, the data shows that at least in the Republican Party, there's a majority of men and a pretty big minority, slightly less than 50, but in the 40s, of women who say, look, they're not that interested in having a woman president. And I did an event in New York last night, and the woman interviewing me said, you know, my grandson took a gap year, and he worked for you all over the country. And she said that the thing that surprised him the most as he was knocking on doors, literally from Arizona to Delaware to Michigan to all kinds of places, was the people who would say, I just don't think I can vote for a woman. Now, what I saw happen after the election, which I found really sad, is that all of a sudden women who people talk about as maybe running for president, whether they decide to or not, now they're in the bullseye. So Elizabeth Warren's on the floor of the Senate reading Coretta Scott King's letter, and Mitch McConnell basically tells her to stop and orders her off the floor. I don't know, Barb. I was in the Senate only for 8 years. You were there a lot longer. I never saw anything like that, right? So orders her off the floor, and she's immediately followed by one of her Democratic male colleagues who goes to the desk and reads the letter, and nobody says a thing. Or Kamala Harris at I think an Intel committee hearing, questioning Jeff Sessions, and she's a former prosecutor. She's going at him, and the chairman of the committee basically tells her to stop. And then all of a sudden I'm reading stories about how, this woman's voice is shrill and this woman is angry, and all of a sudden I think, boy, does that sound familiar. So we've got a lot of work to do. And I'm proud that I had so much support from, so many people across the country, and I got more votes than anybody except Barack Obama in 2008. Anybody in American history. So I know that a majority of people are on the side of giving women a fair shot to compete. And we just have to do as good a job as we can making it possible to have a woman, eventually, soon I hope, in the White House. Because that will be a signal moment that sends a really strong message to all the little boys and girls in our country.
Can I just add one thing to this? I'm just going to add one quick thing. I also think as women go into the armed forces and they proceed up the ladder, and you have women becoming 2 stars, 3 stars, and a 4-star, that's going to change the way men look at women. And it's subtle, but it's sort of machismo and patriotism put together. And maybe we need a little of each. So, okay. You mentioned that more women look like they're going to be running. In fact, Emily's List announced last week that 20,000 women have contacted their organization about running for office. 20,000 women. And Indivisible, which is a leading activist organization, reports that 74% of its email subscribers are women, and most chapters are led by women. So I think, and the young women that I have talked to, out in California, for example, it's, how do I start? What do I do? How do I? And the thing that I always hope is, I say to them, earn your spurs. Don't start at the top. Gather, run for the city council, run for the board, whatever it is. Gather your portfolio of expertise. And do you think that makes sense?
I do. I mean, I'm thrilled by this, and this new group I've started, Onward Together. We're supporting Emerge America and Run for Something and Swing Left and Indivisible and Color of Change. A lot of the groups that are out there encouraging people to run, recruiting them, helping to train them, supporting them. And I think it's exciting because the energy that was unleashed, and Nucci mentioned this with the march. I mean, I write in the book about the contrast between having to go to the inauguration and sitting there and watching that all unfold, and then watching them try to deliver an alternative fact about the size of the inauguration crowd, compared to the energy and the joy and the enthusiasm of the march the next day. And that's what we have to keep alive. And I just want to make 3 quick points. I agree completely with Diane. You know, there are so many things to run for, and unfortunately, a lot of Democrats haven't showed up and run in those positions. And that has left big gaps in state legislatures and city councils and county commissioners and, you know, jobs that really affect people's lives. I think finally in Virginia, you know, we are running a lot of candidates for House seats, state legislative seats, that 2 years, 4 years, 6 years ago, we didn't run anybody. Now, I'm not sure we can win all those to start with, but you got to start somewhere. You got to get your name out there. You've got to get people to know who you are. So running at all levels of government is going to create a pipeline of women who've got the experience and the expertise to get out there and you know, do their very best. Secondly, I think it's incredibly important as we look at 2018 for people to do everything we can to take back the House. And I won 24 districts in congressional districts in the country that have a Republican member of Congress. So just starting with that 24, I won 3 in Texas, for goodness sakes. I mean, starting with those 24 and then layering them on, and I know that you know, Leader Pelosi and all the people working in the DCCC are going to be focused on that. And there are a lot of groups now that can get you connected up, you know, in Virginia, in Maryland, in Pennsylvania. You don't have to travel all that far to try to help us elect Democrats in 2008. And in the Senate, we're going to have some very tough races for our folks. But I think that you know, we have a chance there even to pick up a seat or 2 if we are, you know, really paying attention. And then finally,
We're going to do better than that, Hillary Rodham Clinton.
pick up 2 more. So, well, I'm just talking about keeping all of our incumbents, and picking up 2 more. Let's say Nevada and Arizona, for example. But I guess that'd be the final thing I would say. We need more mentoring. We need more, you know, the idea of running for office is pretty terrifying for a lot of people. And we need more of us, and I'm certainly more than willing to do this, to help encourage young women, but also to help guide them, because it can be a very brutal experience. And to make it clear, you're going to be criticized no matter what you do. And to take criticism seriously, but not personally, so that you can be, you know, confident, learn from what you can so you can be better, but don't let anybody knock you down or diminish or demean you. Get back up and keep going.
Okay. Are you game for a couple more? Run a couple more? Okay. There's something really serious and difficult. Reproductive freedom for women. The ability of a woman to control her own reproductive system based on her religion, based on her doctor, based on her family, but in privacy. From the time you were in the Senate, Mikulski and I in the Senate, we see people eroding that right. I see on the Judiciary Committee the very real softness of Roe v. Wade, dependent on what the Supreme Court might do, and how important it is. And I often think that young women really don't know what it was like 50, 60 years old. They don't know the coat hanger abortions. I sentenced a woman to 10 years in state prison because on twice she came back. She couldn't stop committing abortions. In college, young women passing the plate to go to Tijuana. And now, since Roe, there has been a methodology, a legal system to be able to handle it. So what's happening now? What's happening now is that we're seeing a push to affect those rights. And it comes from all sides. Executive orders, legislation and the nominees that President Trump has put forward to our federal courts. The Trump administration recently rolled back the requirement that employers cover contraception. And just this week, the House held a hearing on a bill that would ban abortion after 6 weeks, before many women even know they're pregnant. So the question is, why do you believe reproductive freedom is so important? And what do you think the most constructive way is that we can fight back? And how do we prevent this erosion of what was a landmark case for us, Roe v. Wade?
Well, here's what is so troubling about these latest efforts. We are at the lowest rate of abortions since 1973, since Roe v. Wade. Why? Because we have better education. A lot of women are more empowered and able to exercise their own rights. They have access to contraception, family planning. And what doesn't make any sense at all is if you were truly concerned about abortion, wouldn't you want to do what works to keep the numbers of abortion as low as possible while maintaining the right under Roe v. Wade? So there's something else going on here. And it's not just about the law, because when you go after contraception, you really are basically saying women have no right to control their own reproductive capacity. And that is what's so troubling to me, Diane, because that is in line with regimes and ideologies around the world that really do want to limit women's autonomy and to be able to make decisions for ourselves. So in our country, we struck a compromise. You know, the compromise was you make the choice within the description of the exercise of that choice in Roe v. Wade. And as First Lady, and Milan remembers this, I went to China and spoke out about their forced abortion policy. And I went to Romania and spoke out against their forced birth policy. Because under the old communist regime, they wanted every woman to have 5 children. And they used to conduct, gynecological exams to make sure that women were not using birth control, were not hiding a pregnancy that they wanted to end. And I went to the orphanage where thousands of these Romanian children who could not be supported, were not wanted, were kept. So when you have an ideology that wants to diminish women's rights and their autonomy, that's when you see people stopping to support contraception and family planning, and not talking about how do we support women with children. How do we support women who are struggling to afford their children? And the final thing I would say about this, and I write about this in the book, we have some perfect examples of what this means. Texas has basically eliminated access to Planned Parenthood. So abortions have gone up, especially in poor counties, and so have maternal deaths, because there's no access to affordable care for hundreds of miles in some of these places. So I think it's very much in line with attacks on women and on women's futures, and so we have to keep standing against it and basically put out the facts. Abortions are down because family planning was up, and women are more empowered to make the best decisions for themselves. And we need to do more to make sure that they can take care of themselves and the children that they have.
Last question, and I'm going to go back to your experience as Secretary of State. Right now, I think, and I think most people think, that we have a terrible problem with North Korea. They've done 6 nuclear tests. They have an intercontinental ballistic missile. It's only a question of time before they attach a warhead that fits and can go through the space barrier. The ICBM can hit anywhere in the United States. They have a leader who could machine gun his own family, and have been producing missiles at a pace that's twice that of his father's. Here's the question, Hillary, and how do we begin to discuss with this country what the problems, because the military strategy is terrible. Seoul, 10 million people, 25 minutes from the DMZ. We have 28,500 troops behind the DMZ and the first barrier of walls, 750,000 North Korean infantry, mountains pockmarked with caves and missiles and rockets. So the military scenario is hundreds of thousands of lives end. What would you do if you were president?
That's right. Keep the breakfast coming. Well, I was in South Korea. I was in Seoul 3 weeks ago at the invitation of a group there to talk about this. And I cannot tell you how anxious the South Koreans are over what they're hearing from this administration and conducting diplomacy by tweeting. And they know that having the President of the United States tweet insults against the leader in North Korea just plays right into the North Korean aspirations to be taken seriously, to be elevated. And so here's what I said then and what I would repeat now. Number one, we need intensive diplomacy, and it was really troubling when I saw Tillerson in Beijing working to get the Chinese on board to really understand that this was the time finally has come for them to exert as much control as possible over the North. And to see President Trump tweet that Tillerson's wasting his time and nothing's going to come of it, there's only one solution. I would have an intensive diplomatic effort going. And, you know, the Chinese do not want to see Japan remilitarized. But Japan has had 2 missiles fly over it. And they're going to have to take some steps to defend themselves. China didn't like it when we said in the prior administration and Obama administration that we were going to send missile defense to South Korea. The Chinese didn't like that. My response to them is, well, if you don't like it, then help us solve the problem. But you can't expect the South Koreans not to defend themselves. So I would start a negotiating effort, and I would just be incredibly determined and patient and not leave until we got everybody at the table and everybody got to vent and everybody got to carry on. And just do everything I could to try to, limit their development of missiles, because having nuclear tests is one thing. Having a miniaturized warhead that can fit on an ICBM, all bets are off, because it can get to Hawaii and it can get to the west coast of the United States. And that's why we need calm, steady thinking and not overreacting. So that's what I would be doing.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you give our candidate a big round of applause, please? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Very thoughtful. Thank you very much.
So another big hand for our 2 heroines here. For the secretary. So just Just a couple of announcements. Everybody here in this room is going to get a book, Onward Together. From wherever you came, the entrance that you came from, your books are going to be available there. And so if you came from the garden, please collect your books there. But before you do that, we have some libations for you, and we have some yummy food for you. So please help yourselves. It's a party.
I don't think it's the proper time, but at some point we should try to find some there. I'll sponsor.
Subsequently went to work briefly at U.S. Steel, then the New York Mercantile Exchange, and then at Goldman Sachs. He joined Goldman in 1990 and became a partner in 1994 and rose up to be the head of the commodities division, and then ultimately the currency commodities fixed income division, then the co-head of the equities division and co-head of the global securities division, and then ultimately in 2006 became the president and chief operating officer and a director. And he is under tight schedule, so I'm going to start right now. Gary, thank you for doing this.
I was just wondering how much of my bio you memorized. So.
Well, I memorized it a little bit.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
So, are the egos bigger in Washington or Wall Street?
What egos?
No egos. Okay.
What egos? None. None whatsoever.
Neither place.
No.
Okay, and have you found since you've become the point man, or one of the 2 point men on the tax bill, that you've become very popular? All of a sudden people call you, tell you how important their issue is for national security or national defense or whatever other reason?
Look, no less or no more people call me today than have called me for a long time.
Okay.
Maybe it's just a personality flaw, but it seems like no more, no less.
Really?
Than
So
before.
people aren't calling you more than they did a year ago?
Not really. It's,
Okay. You don't have high school friends calling you all of a sudden saying this, a few of that?
Not really. It's been interesting that
Okay.
People have sort of let me alone, let me do my job, and I'm sure once they start seeing what we do and how it impacts them, that may change. I think people reserve the right to call me, but so far they haven't exercised that option.
Okay. So yesterday or today, the House leadership unveiled their bill, and you're going to have a meeting at the White House with the president and the leadership at 1:30. So, in talking about it, is the bill that was released, or the proposal released today, is that something the president can support? If that bill went through as is, the president would sign it.
So, David, as you know, the group of 6 of us came out with a framework. And we got to that framework after starting in really diverse, different places, the 6 of us. We got ourselves to a unified framework, which really had 2 driving principles in it. Driving principle number 1 is we had to deliver a middle income tax cut. Number 2 is we had to lower the business tax rate to make us competitive with the rest of the world. The bill that the House delivered today accomplishes both of those objectives. And in fact, they stuck very much to the framework that we have delivered. So yes, the bill that the House has delivered, the Ways and Means Committee delivered today, is a bill that the President can support.
And do you have any reason to think the Senate Finance Committee will agree to the same bill?
Look, I think the Senate, like the House, is going down their path during regular order. One of the other components that we agreed to as the group of 6 is that we were going to do tax reform in what we would call regular order. We would go through normal committee processes, the tax writing committee in the House, the tax writing committee in the Senate. They would write their own bills. They would go through their committee process. They would go to floor. And if we needed to, we would go to conference at the end. That's exactly what's going on here, and that's how we're going to get the buy-in in the process. The Senate is doing that. They are cooperating with the House, and the House did cooperate with the Senate. So we are going to get bills that have a lot in common. I'm not sure they're going to be 100% in common, but I think we're going to be in a good enough position to deliver a tax bill to the president's desk this year.
This year.
This year.
So you're very confident that the House will pass it and the Senate will pass it and the conference will pass it this year?
We are working towards this year.
Okay. So does the House leadership tell you that they have the votes in the House to pass it now?
Look, the bill just got dropped this morning. We know that the House has been spending an enormous amount of time with their members, with their committee members, as well as the rest of their members, working on the details. I am confident, and the Speaker was in the office. Speaker was in the Oval Office 2 days ago talking about the bill with the President. We were there together. I'm confident the Speaker is going to be able to deliver a bill out of the House.
When you do these bills, you have a 10-year cost of something, a deduction cost, or raises, or costs a certain amount of money. That number is prepared by the Joint Tax Committee, more or less. So do you accept these numbers? I mean, how can anybody really know what something's going to cost or bring in 10 years? But is it generally, people accept this as gospel because you have no choice?
Well, you sort of just answered the question.
Well,
I mean, we have to accept the score to get the legislation through. We will argue that the results in the history will tell us that the results will not be what the score says it will be. But we will legislate to a bill that gets the score that we need to get to get it through the legislative process. And we happen to very strongly believe that we are going to way surpass what they're going to score on the revenue side of the equation.
Okay. Does the Treasury have its own revenue estimates, or are not relevant in terms of these things?
No, Treasury is very relevant. Treasury is extremely relevant in this. Yes, they have a large group of people in the Treasury that spend an enormous amount of time on tax and scoring tax and working on that, and they have their own revenue estimates. We have our own revenue estimates, and everyone else is going to have their own revenue estimates on what the economic impact of tax reform, what it will do for the economy.
But in the end, when they're marking the bill up, it's only the Joint Tax Committee numbers that really matter, I assume. So in terms of the bill itself, it's a bill that is designed to have $1.5 trillion of incremental debt at the end of 10 years.
Well, we'd like to say less revenue.
All right, okay. All
right. That's how the instructions are. The instructions are less revenue.
Right, okay. Now, originally, it was supposed to be a revenue-neutral bill. Why did the administration and the House go for a $1.5 trillion deficit, increase in debt?
So, look, that's what the reconciliation instructions give us room to produce a piece of legislation that have $1.5 trillion of less revenue on the scoring system that you're talking about.
Right.
We do not believe that is going to be the actual reality. We believe that by lowering the business tax in the United States and becoming much more competitive with the rest of the world and dropping our rates down where we encourage businesses to come back to the United States and re-domicile back to the United States, that we are going to grow our economy at a faster rate than the model is going to suggest. We also believe that by lowering the tax rate on middle American hardworking families, they are going to spend more money, the velocity is going to increase in the system, and the economy is going to grow. So we do believe that there's going to be more growth in GDP, more revenue to be taxed, and therefore the revenue that they're saying won't show up, we believe it will show up, and we will be able to tax it, even though we tax it at a lower rate.
Okay, let's talk about the corporate tax cut. It's going to take the corporate tax rate from 35% to 20%. Now, there's some people who say, why not phase it in over 5 years? It would cost less money. The administration wanted to do it immediately. Do you think there's a big advantage of doing it immediately versus phasing in?
We do think there's a big advantage to bring immediate. Look, you've sat in a lot of corporate boardrooms. I've sat in a lot of corporate boardrooms. Boards like to know what's going to happen, and they like certainty. Yes, it would be nice to say that it's certain, but there's nothing more certain than having it happen. Okay. We know by having it happen next year, and then on top of that, giving people a 5-year expensing window where they can do 100% expensing, we are sending a very clear message that we want you to invest in this country, we want you to move jobs back, we want you to hire people, and we're not making it ambiguous. We're making it clear what we want you to do and how we're going to grow the economy. And the phase-in, we don't want people to think about investing in this economy. We want you to do it now.
Okay, the repatriation provision, there'll be an excise tax. So under an excise tax provision, there's no incentive to keep the cash offshore because you're going to pay a tax one way or the other. So that money will all come back, presumably. Is there any incentive that the people who bring it back, the companies that bring it back, have to create jobs, or what are they likely to do with the cash? Does anybody have any idea?
So David, you're right. The repatriation fee is a deemed fee. So it's not like you get the choice to bring it back or not bring it back. We're going to collect the tax on you over the tax window, whether you bring the money back or not. We're going to create an environment where we hope that you invest it back in your business. But ultimately, you're either going to invest it back in your business or you're going to distribute it out of your business to someone else who's going to reinvest it back in another business.
Okay. Let's talk about some of the controversial provisions. Of course, controversy is in the eye of the beholder. But let's talk about state and local income tax deduction. You must be very familiar with that.
So, yes, I am. I've heard about it.
Right. So in states that you are a resident of New York, and states like New York, Massachusetts, other high taxing states, the high state and local income tax, they will no longer, residents of those states will no longer be able to deduct that income tax. Is that correct under this proposal?
It's sort of correct. There are a couple little provisions in there that we did add back some real estate tax deductibility, property tax, if you do choose to be an itemizer.
Okay, so,
but as a whole, we have eliminated the vast majority of those deductions.
Won't you believe that that will be very difficult for high state tax representatives or senators to agree to that provision?
David, at the end of the day, this comes down to, are we delivering a middle-income working family tax cut or not? We believe that the House plan is delivering that. And when you score it out and when you see the distributions, and the distribution tables will be out relatively shortly, right. The distribution tables will determine whether we're delivering that tax cut or not. We believe that this plan that the House laid out is able to adequately deliver that distribution to those working families, where we told you we were going to deliver that tax cut.
Now, the average family of four in the materials that came out today is median family of four income is $59,000, and they will get a tax cut of about $1,140 or something like that, roughly.
I won't argue for $40, yes.
Or something like that.
Yes.
But so the median family of four will get a median family will get it. What about the people who are in the upper income? Will they be getting a tax increase or a tax cut or just neutral?
Look, it depends on each and everyone's individual circumstances. As you know, the hard part about taxes is everyone's got their own unique set of circumstances. We set out with the objective, as I said, we had two objectives: middle income tax relief and corporate tax relief. We have not targeted the upper income brackets, but we do believe there is quite a bit in for the upper income families. We're dealing with the state tax, and we're dealing with other things that affect upper income taxpayers. So we do believe when you look at the package in its entirety, we're able to touch every taxpayer in some positive way.
So let's take the estate tax. Now, you're going to phase that out over a period of time. So I think the estate tax goes away in 4 or 5 years under your proposal, under the proposal. Why not just get away with it, do away with it right now, immediately? Just costs too much to do that? Or?
It's about scoring. I think the House plan is 24, but they're going to double the exemption day one. So next year they'll double the exemption up to $11 million a person, $22 million for a married couple. And then in 24, they'll give you a full exemption on the death tax.
But the gift tax will stay in place, more or less.
I don't know 100% what they're going to do on the gift tax, but there's definitely going to be some gift tax restrictions in there.
Okay, so in other words, if you want to give money to your children, you're better off to wait 4 years to die, then you get it tax-free. But
you'll have to debate that with your children.
All right, okay.
I think my children prefer I stay alive.
Okay. Well, I have no doubt that that's the case. I'm not sure with my kids, but okay. So let's talk about universities. A new provision that many people didn't anticipate is now in there, which says that if you're a university and you have a private university, not a public university, you have an endowment, there'll be a 2% tax on that endowment income. Why not include, if you're going to do something, public university, they have big endowments as well?
Look, the House is making their decisions on how they want to raise revenue, how they want to balance the bill. how they want to make it work. And it's over $1 billion threshold. It's not on the first dollar of an endowment that you have. I also think there are some laws in the system about taxing private entities versus public entities. You're getting into a layer of tax legality that I will admit is above my understanding of the tax code.
I doubt there's anything that, at this point, I mean, you worked on very complex corporate transactions. Have you ever worked on anything as complex as the tax code?
Probably not. Probably not. I mean, it's got as many moving parts and more constituencies than I've seen in almost any transaction. No, than any transaction I've ever done.
Now, this bill is designed to pass the Congress, but it's designed to pass with no Democratic votes. If it passes with no Democratic votes, can the administration live with that?
Yes, we prefer it to be bipartisan. Okay. And we have spent an enormous amount of time trying to make it bipartisan. I think you've seen that the president has traveled with Democratic members of the Senate to their states to talk about the bill. The president has had dinners with Democratic Senate members. We've had bipartisan meetings in both the House and the Senate, in the White House. I and Secretary Mnuchin have spent a lot of time with different Democratic groups. We've met with the Blue Dog Dems a couple different times, trying to get bipartisan support for what we're doing. We would love to have a bipartisan 60-vote bill.
But if it's a Republican-only vote, the president would still sign it, presumably. I mean, he's not going to not sign it because it doesn't have any Democratic votes.
It delivers middle-class tax relief and a 20% corporate tax rate, and it shows up on his desk, I can guarantee he's going to sign it.
And does the president expect to be involved in lobbying members for votes, or is he going to say now it's the House problem or the Senate problem, I'll stay above the fray? Or is he going to get involved in lobbying?
The president cares a lot about tax reform. This is one of his main pillars that he ran on. It's all about cleaning up Washington. It's all about making the system fair. It's all about returning hard-earned income back to middle-class families. The president's going to do what he needs to do to make sure we deliver on his campaign promise.
Okay, let's talk about a few other things before we get back to taxes, okay? Let's talk about trade, another easy issue. NAFTA. Do you expect that there will be a renegotiation that will be agreed to, or do you think that there's more likely that we'll pull out of NAFTA?
We are trying to renegotiate NAFTA to be fair, to be good for American workers, to be good for American jobs, and to make sure that our American-based companies are treated fairly in a free trade system.
All right, so you think you will work out a deal?
We're trying. I mean, the negotiators are continuously meeting, and we're continuously trying to get to a point where we think that American-based companies and American-based manufacturers are treated fairly in the agreement.
Okay, in terms of trade, the president will be going to China shortly, and he has from time to time been upset with the trade deficit we have with China. Do you have any plans to do anything about that or mention that to Xi Jinping when he's there?
I would probably assume it gets mentioned.
Mentioned, okay. And what about South Korea? He's not going there, but he's been upset about the treaty we have with South Korea. Anything like that happen there?
He's going there.
Oh, he's going there. So he's going to Vietnam, South Korea, Japan, and China. Is that right?
He's going to Tokyo.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Tokyo, and then he's going, and then Philippines.
So when he goes to South Korea, he will mention the trade imbalance? Mm-hmm. Okay. Let me ask you about...
Look, he's also got many other issues on his agenda. Obviously, North Korea is a big issue. He's going to spend a lot of time talking about North Korea with a bunch of the...
Now, when the president's gone overseas before, you have gone with him, but now your responsibility is to get this tax bill, so you're not going to go on this trip?
Yes, I had a long discussion with the president that I thought it was a better use of my time. Not that the trip isn't unbelievably important, but the tax reform is so important that I thought being here and working with Congress, and Secretary Mnuchin is in the same place, that the two of us staying here and working with Congress to make sure that tax reform stays on its agenda while he's gone. It's a long trip. He's gone over 12 days, that we should stay here and work on that, and that's what we're going to do.
So when you're doing that, will you be, when they're having markups, we won't be in the sessions of markups, but presumably they'll be calling you because your input is going to be valuable, so you expect to be involved in all the back and forth?
Yeah, we have great relationships with leadership of both the House and the Senate, with the committee chairs, committee leaders. We're in relatively constant dialogue with them on where they're headed, what their ideas are, what their concepts are, and making sure that we're all working together to get a bill to the president's desk.
Now, on health care legislation, do you expect that will be revived as a possible thing to do after a tax cut is done?
I mean, right now, we're planning on looking at healthcare in the new year.
Okay, and there was a rumor that maybe the president or somebody wanted to have the elimination of the mandate in the tax bill, the healthcare mandate. Is that off the table now?
Well, the president tweeted about it yesterday.
Well,
so it's not off the table. It's something that could be looked at.
Okay.
And we are spending a little bit of time looking at that.
Okay.
And if it works and we have votes, the president would be inclined to have us look at it and look at it quite aggressively if we can get that done as well.
Now, the president wants to do a tweet. Does he call you and say, I'm going to do a tweet in a certain area? Does he consult with you before they go out, or not so much?
You know, David, sometimes yes, sometimes no. It depends on the topic.
Okay. So in terms of your background, you have been very public about the fact that you were not a great student because you were dyslexic. Mm-hmm. So how did you realize you were dyslexic, and how did your family get you treatment for that?
Well, I try and explain this to people, and this audience might be the right age to understand this. In the 1960s, when I was growing up as a dyslexic kid, I don't know if dyslexia was sort of a commonplace name for a disease. So when I was growing up, you know, it was not diagnosed, or if it was diagnosed, it wasn't called what it was called. In fact, I probably wasn't diagnosed till high school or even later,
So
what my issue was.
So before that, you didn't realize you were at a disadvantage, and you just thought you weren't a great student? Or?
Well, look, I knew what was going on. I think it was everyone else that had a problem.
Okay.
I knew exactly where I knew where I was. It was everyone else that had a problem. So, you know, the typical issue was that everyone thought I was lazy, didn't apply myself, didn't care, you know, bad student. I was labeled with all of those issues because I could never keep up with the work. I could never get the homework done. I could never be prepared for class enough because guess what? There just weren't enough hours in a day to possibly be prepared for class. And the negative feedback loop just became such a bad negative feedback loop that you sort of fall into this rut. And, you know, it was no one's fault. No one knew any better. It wasn't that my parents weren't trying. They were surely trying.
So you got graduated from high school, though, and you went to American
Barely.
Okay.
Yeah.
You ever thought that it'd be easier on dyslexics if a word for the problem was easier to spell? I mean, dyslexia.
I still can't spell it. Don't ask me to spell it today.
Okay.
Starts with a D. That's how much I know.
So you went to American University, and did you struggle there, or you did okay?
So, look, I know there's, I just saw Neil Kerwin here, so I know there's an American University crowd in the room here somewhere.
The president of the university is right here. Sylvia's right there.
They're right in front of me. So, look, I thank you to American University for accepting me, because that was probably a long shot for them. But when I got to college, it was completely different. You get to college, and you get to reinvent yourself. I explained this to all my daughters when they went to college. Like, no one knows you're the dumb kid, or no one knows you're the kid that can't read, or no one knows anything about your history. You get to walk in with a complete blank slate, and you get to redefine yourself. Number two thing about college, and I've said this to every kid who's ever listened to me, is at max, you go to class 16 hours a week. If you take 4 classes for 4 hours, you're in class 16 hours a week. So what is college? College is a time management exercise. So if you tell me I've been in class 16 hours a week, I can get prepared to be in class 16 hours a week because I can reread the same thing 22 times. I can figure it out on the 22nd time usually. In high school, when you have to be in class 8 hours a day and then you want to play a sport and then you get home at 8 o'clock at night and you want to get a few hours sleep, you can't reread something 22 times. Okay. College to me, I don't want to say it was easy, but getting in was hard. Doing okay in college was all about time management. Right. Yeah, I maybe didn't spend as much time having fun, but I was able to get myself through because I was able to manage myself.
Were you an athlete as well?
I was not.
You were not.
I was not a good enough athlete to be an athlete in college, but that's a whole other story.
I know the feeling.
Okay.
So after you graduate, you went back to your native area of Cleveland area, and you worked for U.S. Steel.
I did.
What were you doing? You weren't a steel worker.
No. That was a little joke in my career there. I worked for the home building products division of United States Steel that sold aluminum siding, gutter coil, and replacement windows.
And were you good at that, or?
I wasn't there long enough to find out.
Okay, so,
How's
all right,
that?
so there's an apocryphal story, sometimes apocryphal stories may actually be true, that you met somebody who asked you about options, you took a taxi ride with him,
Yep.
and you got a job.
Yep.
Can you explain what the...
So I'll give you the 5-minute version of the story because it's about as quick as I can. So after my freshman year in college, I did the typical summer internship at the Cleveland brokerage office of one of the major broker dealers. You know, a week in equities, a week in the back office, a week in fixed income, a week in commodities. Spend the rest of the summer in any group you want. Of course, I fell in love with the commodity guys because they were yelling and screaming and throwing phones around. Right. So it was typical for my personality. This was in the summer of '80. It was in those summers. For those of you that have any remembering of what's going on in the commodity markets, this was during the Hunt brothers and what they were doing in the gold and silver market. Right. They had a big gold arbitrage desk in this office. I convinced my grandmother to give me money to open up a trading account. I learned to trade the gold arb that summer, made a ton of money in those 30 days, tried to convince my father that I shouldn't go back to college. I somehow lost that argument. I don't know how I lost that argument to this day, but I realized that what I wanted to do in life. I went back. I did my next 3 years of college in 2 years because I had to get back to the financial markets. The U.S. Steel thing was a little bit of a joke because I was trying to take a month off and then move to New York, and my dad forced me to get a job. So while I was doing the U.S. Steel issue, I took a Friday off, came to New York to go to the floor of the commodities exchange, naively just thinking I'd walk in and get a job, of course. Right. You know, little did I know there'd be like, 17 layers of security around the commodities exchange. Literally hung out there for the entire day trying to figure out how to get a job. And literally in like desperation at the end, I finally got myself onto the floor but couldn't get through the turnstiles in. Literally saw a guy running off the floor at like 2:30 yelling to someone, "Hey, I got to run to the airport. I'll call you from the airport." This was before cell phones. I always have to remind kids they're a little younger. No
Ubers either.
There were no cell phones back then. I jumped in the elevator with him and said, "Hey, I heard you going to LaGuardia." He says, "Yeah, can we share a taxi?" And so I got in the taxi with him, and in that taxi ride, better lucky than good, always, he happened to be a senior guy at one of the big brokerage firms on the floor. That week, they had just really for the first time ever in the United States, probably in the world, they had started trading options on futures. He said, "Hey, do you know options?" I said, "Of course." I gave him all the lines. He said, "Well, I'm the options trader. I have no idea what I'm doing. If you could stand behind me and help me trade, we'd hire you." So I got home to Cleveland that night. I went to the Barnes & Noble. They still existed back then. I happened to buy the right book. I bought the Options as Strategic Investment, Macmillan book. And I said, "Okay, I can't read this whole book over the weekend. Let's just pick 2 chapters and memorize them." Picked 2 chapters and memorized them on 2 different strategies. Went in there, went back for an interview the next week, convinced them I knew everything about options, got hired, moved to New York the next week, and started being a corporate guy.
Well, wow, great. So I guess two questions arise immediately. One, did you give any of the profits from your gold arbitrage to your grandmother? Did she get anything?
So I gave her the money back like a week later.
With the profits?
No.
Okay.
Forgot about that.
Okay,
but she's still alive today. So
wow.
105 last week. So
wow, congratulations.
Something good about that.
Wow. Well, I hope she's watching. Maybe she realizes she should have gotten some profits from you. And the man who hired you, what became of him?
Hillary Bergman. He's still around. He's still in the business.
And is he, like if he called you up and lobbied something on the tax bill, would you listen?
He doesn't have my cell phone number or my phone number, and don't give it to him.
Okay, all right, okay. He probably could find you. Okay, but right, so that worked out, and then from there, you ultimately got a job in 1990. You joined Goldman.
Yes.
And it turned out you were a pretty good trader, so you worked your way up and worked out.
Yeah, it's been a good run.
Okay, so let's go back to the tax bill for a moment.
You sure? You shouldn't want to talk about trading?
Well, what your great skill in trading was, in trading, you're going to lose money lots of times. You just have to get over that and go on the next thing, right? You just can't get depressed.
Exactly right.
So did you have some trades sometimes that just didn't work, and how long did you stay with them, or you just...
Most of your trades don't work.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
No, that's the difference between good traders and bad traders, I always said.
Okay.
I always said like 80% of your trades aren't going to work. You just have to realize the 20 that are really good and stick with them.
Okay. So now you were a registered Democrat. Is that right?
I still am.
So, all right, still are. And so, did you actually know President Trump before you got this position? Had you ever met him? Never met him.
Never met him.
So
that's not true. We met each other once at a Yankees game. We were in George Steinbrenner's box together many years ago.
He was a man who died when there was no estate tax. That was what he's famous for. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you got it. Somebody called you. Was it Jared or somebody and said, "Would you like to meet my father-in-law?" And did you realize it was a semi-job interview, or what did you think it was during the transition?
Wasn't quite sure. It was portrayed as come in and talk to the president-elect at the time about your views of the U.S. economy and what you think's going on.
Okay. And so after the first time you met with him, did you think you were going to get a job offer, or you weren't sure, or you weren't really sure you wanted one?
I had all of those emotions.
Okay.
I knew I was going. I was going to talk about the economy. In typical President-elect Trump style, the interview went literally 360 degrees, went the gamut of all different topics all over the place. And towards the end, I think it turned into, hey, what would you do in my administration? Even though that's not where I was when I walked in, and I wasn't sure when I walked out what 100% of my thinking was. But I was quite intrigued with the meeting.
And your family, were they supportive of your going to Washington and working for a non-Democrat, or they didn't care?
My family is supportive of me in whatever I want to do. And look, more importantly, they're supportive of helping the country in any way we can help the country.
Okay. So at one point, the president said, if I'd met you earlier, I would have made you Secretary of Treasury. Do you remember that comment?
I might have.
Right.
I might not have.
Okay, all right. So in any event, so you got the job. When you got to Washington, did you realize that the White House job, while it's close to the president, you have a small office. You used to have a big office. You got a great view before. Now you have no view. You got over that, right?
Yeah, that's
no big thing. Okay.
No, yeah, I agree. I did have a great office before that.
Great view. I know.
Yeah.
So when you're working in the White House, it's very easy to get people to come to see you. If you want to see somebody, you can invite them in. They want to come to the White House mess. How do you find the working environment at the White House compared to, let's say, at Goldman? Easier, harder, more pressure every day?
Oh, from a pressure standpoint, it's dramatically more pressure. I think when you realize that you're working for 300+ million Americans and trying to deliver to them the best ideas and the best results in the most efficient way possible, it's pretty daunting.
Okay.
Look, I had shareholders and I had partners, but it's different from partners and shareholders. Like when I had partners, and you've done this, you can go and say, hey, I screwed up, I'm sorry. We'll do better tomorrow. When you've got citizens and you've got news watching you 24 hours a day, you can't mess up. You've got to get it right.
So you developed a very close relationship with the president. How many times a day in the early part of the administration were you going to see him? And could you just walk in any time? And has it changed a bit now? You just can't walk in because the new chief of staff doesn't like that?
Look, the president likes people coming in to communicate with him. He likes knowing what's going on. He loves the input. He loves opinions. He loves views. Right. In the transition, in the beginning when we got here, we were spending enormous amount of time together with many other advisors he had in the Oval Office. Now the reality is we've got a pretty well-designed game plan, and we're in execution mode. I'm in execution mode with the president, with the Secretary of Treasury, and the members of Congress, getting a tax bill done. So I have unbelievable access to the president. Whenever I need him or want him, I can get a hold of him. I can walk in. I can go see him wherever he is. That's not a problem. Well, and he's not bashful about telling me his views.
Oh, he's not bashful.
No, he's not bashful.
So you developed a very close relationship with him, and then after Charlottesville, it was said by some in the press that maybe it wasn't as strong. What would you say your relationship is with the president today?
I think it's as strong as it's ever been.
Okay. And so you can talk to him anytime, and he's happy with you and so forth.
I probably saw him 5 times already today.
Wow.
At least, and I'm leaving here to go be with him.
Okay, and this afternoon, the new chairman of the Fed is to be announced, I believe. So you're one of the candidates. Do you really want that job, or you're not sure?
President, sharply at 3 o'clock is going to make his decision known. I think the president has made a spectacular choice, and I'm really supportive of what the president's doing with his decision.
Okay. And no regrets about if you're not the a person getting the job. You're no regrets.
I'm really supportive of the president's decision.
Okay.
And it's a great decision.
Okay. So many people who work in the White House, I did it myself, they burn out after a while. Mm-hmm. So how long do you think you would like to stay in the White House? Would you like to do this after the tax bill? Would you like to go, or 2 years, 3 years, or any plan?
Look, David, the opportunity to execute the president's economic agenda and deliver for the American people is an extraordinary opportunity. I'm going to do this as long as I can possibly do it.
Okay. Whenever you can't possibly do anymore, what would you like to do next? Private equity, something important like that, or?
Well, being your replacement, you'd fill that.
All right, folks, welcome to the Fox 10 News Now stream, part of fox10phoenix.com. We're taking you out now to Gilbert here, where we're taking live aerials of Sky Fox. Some sort of police situation happening right now. Working to get you guys some more details here, but let's continue. Just watch Sky Fox up in the air for a police situation. All right, folks, we are getting some new details here with this police situation. DPS saying that this is a bank robbery suspect out of Gilbert right now, and our Sky Fox is up in the air getting you these live aerials right now. Thanks to all our viewers on fox10phoenix.com as well as Fox 10 Phoenix Facebook Live. If you're just joining the stream, let us know where you are watching from right now, as we know that we always have viewers from all over the country and the world here with this police situation happening now. Once again, folks, welcome to the Fox 10 News Now stream, part of Fox10Phoenix.com. The search for a suspect in the East Valley right now. You can see live aerials. All right, so you can see what looks to be the suspect's car right here, and it looks like it crashed right into that corner there, and obviously then suspect then probably left the vehicle and is now hiding out somewhere in this neighborhood. Got a heavy police presence here, and we'll continue to monitor these aerials here. You can even see that wheel still trying to spin right there. So you can take a look here as our Sky Fox is able to pan the camera here. You can see the canal, the empty canal where police really look to be searching for right now for the suspect here. And you can see they do have their guns drawn. Just at any moment, you don't never know when the suspect may come out or may appear. So we'll continue. Watch here live. Folks, just remember that this is a raw feed right now, so viewer discretion is advised at all times when we are showing you these police investigations. You just don't know what might happen here. So you can see police officers here. They're trying to investigate the situation and figure out, okay, where is the suspect at this moment here? Could he be in that culvert area? They might want to get a canine and send the dog out. Let's see. As you can see here, we're trying to get some sort of visual here for the suspect. We're going to see here if the police are going to be sending the canine dog out to see if they can get a better look and try to drag this suspect out of here. For some reason or another, police believe that this suspect is under this bridge here, so we're going to see in just a little bit here. We always do appreciate you guys joining us here live on the Fox 10 News Now stream, part of fox10phoenix.com. You can see right there, the canine dog is coming to the scene here. They're gonna send it out. Here we go. So canine has been released. Let's see if the dog can get some sort of visual. Right, folks, we just got a slight update from our news desk here, and it says Gilbert PD is currently involved in a pursuit of a male suspect in Mesa right now near Hawes and Southern Avenue. The incident is currently unfolding, and no details right now are immediately known. So that's the very latest from Gilbert PD as they are continuing to look for this suspect, and we will continue to follow live right here on the Fox 10 News Now stream as long as our chopper is up there. All right, so we're getting, here comes the police now. We're going to see if we could get that suspect. K9 is leading the way right now. Let's see if we could get a better look here. Viewer discretion is advised, as always, folks. We just don't know what's going to happen here, and we don't know if the suspect is armed. But the police do have their guns drawn. We're going to see what happens in just a little bit here. Folks, if you're just joining us here on the Fox 10 News Now stream, we have been following this story here for you for the last 10 minutes right here on fox10phoenix.com and Fox 10 Phoenix Facebook Live. Remember, when there is breaking news, of course, we are streaming it here for you worldwide. And this is a search for a suspect, and we are learning that it's a bank robbery suspect from Gilbert. Now we are centered in the investigation in East Mesa right now as police trying to see if this suspect may be in this culvert area right here. If you're just joining us as well, let us know where you are watching from right now. I know we have a lot of people obviously from Arizona, but we always do have lots of viewers from all over the country and the world as well. So no word yet, though, if police believe that this suspect is officially down there. I mean, this suspect could be long gone by now, but not far from this area was the suspect's car. So it's somewhere in this general area. As you can see, police trying to open this gate right now, and maybe they want to move the K9 unit a little bit farther away. So let's see here. Okay, so you see that we have the K-9 vehicle down there now. Okay, folks, guns are drawn right here, and police taking a defensive stance right now. Pure discretion is advised at this time. Okay, we do have the suspect here. He has been located, and right now he is, at this moment, following the officer's commands. So they were able to get this suspect out of that tunnel area, and they're going to do a takedown right here, and now in custody. So great work by the police officers there to locate the suspect and put him in custody. Folks, you have been watching right here on News Now. Thanks to all our viewers on Fox10Phoenix.com as well as Fox 10 Phoenix Facebook Live. When breaking news does occur, you know we have you covered. Folks, if you're just joining us here, there was a search for the suspect in East Mesa. Just moments ago, police were able to get the suspect to come out of the tunnel. And now they do have that suspect in custody. All right, folks, we want to take you now out to Houston, where the World Series champs Houston Astros returning home after a thrilling World Series that was found right here only on Fox. Goes the full 7 games. And the Houston Astros, for the first time in franchise history, World Series champions. Their parade is tomorrow at 2 o'clock Houston time. That'll be 12 o'clock out here in Arizona. We'll have it for you right here, fox10phoenix.com. There you go, United Airlines charter flight 2525 landing at Bush Airport. It is going to be welcomed by a water cannon salute provided by the Houston Fire Department. There you have it, folks. The Houston Astros coming into the sunset. Back home, their parade is going to be tomorrow. And there you go, the water cannon salute. As you can see there, a great honor for this team, winning first time in franchise history. right, there's you have it, folks. World Series champs return home. Houston Astros, after a very, very good World Series going the full 7 games, comes out as the winner, and they will be having a big-time parade tomorrow, celebrating their first World Series in franchise history. Thanks so much for joining us today on Fox News Now. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone.